Tower, Tower, do you copy? I need you to answer me right now. The man's voice trembled through the cockpit microphone, though he tried to hide it behind the calm tone pilots were trained to maintain. Outside the windshield, clouds stretched like a pale ocean beneath the aircraft's wings. Inside, the quiet hum of the engine sounded suddenly louder than it should have. Then another voice cut through the silence. Small, nervous but clear. "Sir, the plane, it's dropping." The man sitting in the captain's seat didn't look at her immediately. His hands tightened around the controls, jaw locked as if refusing to acknowledge what was happening. A red warning light blinked on the panel between them. The girl sitting beside him swallowed hard. The headset felt too big on her head. The seatbelt pressed tightly across her chest as the aircraft shuddered again, the nose dipping slightly toward the clouds below. Somewhere behind them, 222 passengers were strapped into their seats, unaware that the calm voice over the intercom just minutes earlier had been hiding something deeply wrong. She stared at the instruments she barely understood. Numbers flickered, needles trembled, and in that moment the cockpit suddenly felt much smaller than it had just 10 minutes ago. "Tower went silent," the pilot muttered under his breath, frustration leaking through the edges of his professional mask. The girl's fingers gripped the edge of her seat. Her heart pounded so hard she could hear it inside the headset. Are we going to crash?" she whispered. The pilot didn't answer right away. Outside, the clouds thickened, a plane dipped again, and somewhere far below, the ground waited. Before this story goes any further, take a second to subscribe, because stories like this deserve to be heard, because sometimes the people who change everything are the ones nobody expects to matter at all. And in the next few minutes inside that cockpit, a decision would be made that would silence an entire control tower and force an 11-year-old girl to face a moment most adults could never imagine. The question wasn't just whether the plane would survive. The question was whether courage could come from someone the world had never taken seriously. Earlier that morning, the airport had looked ordinary. Sunlight spilled across the runway, reflecting off polished metal wings and the glass walls of the terminal. Travelers moved in quiet routines, rolling suitcases, checking phones, sipping coffee while waiting for boarding announcements. Nothing about the day suggested that it would end up remembered by hundreds of people for the rest of their lives. Among the passengers was 11-year-old Lily Harper. She sat near the gate window, her legs swinging slightly above the floor as she watched airplanes taxi across the runway. Every time an engine roared to life, her eyes lit up with fascination. Flying had always fascinated her. Not just the idea of going somewhere far away, but the mystery of how something so heavy could lift itself into the sky. Most kids her age were glued to phones or games. Lily preferred watching wings cut through clouds. When boarding was announced, passengers lined up slowly, forming the familiar quiet procession down the jet bridge. Lily followed along beside a flight attendant who had smiled at her curiosity earlier. The cockpit door happened to be open as they passed. Inside sat Captain Robert Hale. He was a man whose entire life seemed carved out of discipline. Gray hair neatly combed, white pilot shirt pressed perfectly, gold stripes on his sleeves catching the overhead lights. His posture alone carried authority. He barely glanced up as passengers boarded. Years of flying had turned it into routine, faces blurred together. But Lily didn't walk past immediately. She stopped. Her eyes widened as she stared at the glowing instruments, switches, and displays surrounding the pilot's seat. Captain Hale noticed eventually. He turned slightly, eyebrow lifting with mild impatience. "Yes?" "I've never seen one this close," Lily said quietly. There was no attitude in her voice, just wonder. For a moment, the captain studied her. Then he sighed softly, the way adults often do when a child interrupts their schedule. "Airplanes are more complicated than they look," he said. "I know," Lily replied. "That's why they're amazing." The captain didn't smile. But something about her answer lingered in the air. Most people treated cockpits like mysterious rooms they weren't meant to understand. This kid sounded like she wanted to learn. Still, the moment passed quickly. "Take your seat," he said. She nodded politely and continued down the aisle. What Captain Hale didn't realize was that Lily remembered everything she saw: the position of the control yoke, the digital altitude display, the layout of switches near the throttle. Not because she expected to use any of it, but because curiosity has a way of storing details quietly in the background. The flight itself began smoothly. 222 passengers settled into their seats as the aircraft taxied onto the runway. The engines roared. The plane lifted gracefully into the morning sky. For the first hour, everything felt routine. Passengers watched movies. Flight attendants served drinks. Children looked out windows at the ocean of clouds. Inside the cockpit, Captain Hale monitored instruments with the quiet confidence of someone who had spent decades flying. But confidence sometimes hides a dangerous habit, complacency. It started with a small flicker on one of the navigation displays, a warning light that blinked once, then disappeared. Hale frowned slightly but didn't mention it. Systems sometimes glitched. Technology wasn't perfect. Minutes later, the aircraft trembled lightly, just a small vibration, barely noticeable to passengers. But inside the cockpit, Hale's eyes shifted toward the instrument panel again. Another warning indicator flashed briefly. This time, he leaned forward. Something wasn't behaving the way it should. Behind the cockpit door, the cabin remained calm. Lily sat quietly in her seat, staring out the window as sunlight reflected off the wing. She had no idea that inside the cockpit, the first quiet signals of trouble had already begun, and within the next hour, that small flicker of light would grow into a crisis that no one on board expected to face. The aircraft climbed steadily through 33,000 feet, cruising smoothly above a blanket of white clouds. From the cabin, the world looked peaceful. The sky stretched endlessly in shades of blue. Sunlight poured through the windows like calm reassurance. But inside the cockpit, the mood had begun to change. Captain Hale leaned forward in his seat, eyes narrowing at the instrument panel. The flicker had returned. This time it stayed longer. A small caution message blinked on the flight display, then vanished again before the system could fully register it. Hale tapped a few switches. The panel responded normally. But something about it felt wrong. Pilots develop instincts after thousands of hours in the air. Tiny inconsistencies stand out the way a single wrong note stands out in a song, and right now, something sounded off. He reached for the radio. "Tower, this is Flight 728 requesting system confirmation." Static answered him. He adjusted the frequency. "Tower, Flight 728 requesting confirmation." Still nothing. Hale frowned deeper now. Communication failures weren't unheard of, but they were rarely this sudden. Behind the cockpit door, the passengers remained unaware, except for one. Lily had noticed the shift long before anyone else. It wasn't something obvious. No alarms, no sudden drop, just a feeling. The kind that settles quietly in your chest when adults start acting differently. She watched a flight attendant walk past her row, moving a little faster than before. The woman's smile looked practiced now, less natural. Lily looked toward the cockpit door. It was still closed. But something about the atmosphere of the plane had changed. Back inside the cockpit, Hale tried the radio again. Nothing. He checked the navigation display. The aircraft suddenly dipped slightly, just a few hundred feet, but it was enough to trigger a quiet, alert tone. Hale grabbed the control yoke and corrected the pitch, forcing the nose back up. "What the?" he muttered. Another alert appeared briefly on the panel. Autopilot disconnect. The aircraft shuddered once more. Now Hale's calm exterior began to crack. Manual control wasn't a problem. Pilots were trained for it. But multiple systems glitching at the same time meant something deeper could be wrong. He toggled the communication switch again. "Tower, Flight 728 declaring communication difficulty, respond." Silence. Static hissed faintly through the headset. Then nothing. Hale sat back slightly, mind racing through procedures. Behind him, 222 lives depended on his judgment. Pilots were trained to stay calm in chaos, but calm didn't mean certainty. He tried a secondary radio channel, still no response. At that moment, a soft knock sounded on the cockpit door. Hale hesitated before unlocking it. When it opened slightly, a small voice spoke through the gap. "Sir, excuse me." It was Lily. She held the door gently as if afraid of interrupting something important. Hale looked at her, clearly irritated by the timing. "This area is restricted," he said firmly. "I know," she said quickly. I think something's wrong with the plane." Hale blinked once, then he sighed. "You should return to your seat." But Lily didn't move. Instead, she looked past him toward the instrument panel. Her eyes scanned the blinking indicator that had just appeared again, and her expression shifted from curiosity to concern. "The altitude needle keeps dropping," she said quietly. Hale turned back toward the panel instantly. The aircraft dipped again, harder this time. Passengers in the cabin felt their stomachs lift as the plane briefly lost lift before stabilizing again. Gas rippled through the rows of seats. Hale grabbed the controls tightly. "What are you doing here?" he snapped without turning around. "I like airplanes," Lily said softly. Another warning light flashed. Stall warning. Hale's stomach tightened. This wasn't a glitch anymore. The plane dipped again, harder. Passengers began looking around nervously now. Overhead bins rattled slightly as the aircraft struggled against unstable air. Hale tried the radio once more, his voice sharper this time. "Tower, Flight 728 experiencing control irregularities. Respond immediately." Only silence answered him. Lily stood frozen just inside the cockpit doorway, watching the instruments with wide blue eyes. For the first time since the flight began, Captain Robert Hale felt something he hadn't felt in decades of flying. Uncertainty. The aircraft dropped another few hundred feet, and somewhere inside that cockpit, a moment was approaching that would force a child to make a decision no 11-year-old should ever have to face. The aircraft dropped again. Not violently, not the kind of plunge that throws people from their seats, but enough to make every passenger feel the subtle shift in gravity. Drinks trembled in plastic cups. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. 222 people suddenly became aware that something about this flight was no longer routine. Inside the cockpit, Captain Robert Hale tightened his grip on the control yoke. His eyes moved rapidly between instruments, scanning numbers and indicators that no longer behaved the way they should. The stall warning had flashed only for a moment, but it had been enough to send a sharp pulse of adrenaline through his chest. Lily remained standing near the doorway, frozen in place, unsure whether she should move or stay. Her instincts told her something serious was happening, but the adult world had always taught her that children were supposed to step back when serious things happened. Another vibration ran through the aircraft. Hale pulled slightly on the controls, trying to stabilize the pitch. For a moment the plane responded. Then the control yoke resisted, not locked, not frozen, but sluggish, like steering a car through thick mud. "That shouldn't be happening," he muttered under his breath. His mind raced through training procedures, manual override, system resets, alternate control channels. But one thing kept repeating in his thoughts like a warning bell. The tower still hadn't answered. Tower. Flight 728 declaring potential flight control malfunction. Respond. Static. Nothing else. Behind them, the passengers began to sense the tension spreading through the cabin. The aircraft leveled briefly, but the air felt different now. People glanced at each other. Seatbelts clicked tighter. A flight attendant walked down the aisle speaking calmly to passengers, though her eyes kept drifting toward the cockpit door. Inside the cockpit, Lily's gaze remained fixed on the instruments. She didn't understand every number, but patterns had always fascinated her. Even in school, she noticed small details other kids ignored. And right now, a pattern was unfolding in front of her. The altitude display ticked downward again, slowly, quietly. "Sir," she said carefully. Hale didn't respond. His focus remained locked on the controls. "The altitude keeps dropping." He glanced at the display again and felt his jaw tighten. She was right. The aircraft dipped another 100 feet. "How do you know what you're looking at?" Hale asked sharply. "I read about planes," Lily replied, "and I watch videos. My uncle used to fly small ones." The words barely registered in Hale's mind. He was too busy fighting the controls, trying to keep the aircraft stable. Then suddenly another warning tone sounded. Autopilot system failure. Hale's breath caught. Now the situation had officially crossed from inconvenience into emergency. He flipped another switch, attempting a manual stabilization sequence. The plane shuddered again before leveling out briefly. For several seconds, the cockpit filled with nothing but the hum of engines and the steady ticking of instruments. Then the nose dipped again, This time deeper. Passengers in the cabin gasped as the plane dropped several hundred feet in seconds before Hale managed to recover it. Sweat gathered at the edge of his collar now. This aircraft was supposed to be responding instantly to his commands. Instead, it felt unpredictable, like an animal refusing to listen. And still, the tower remained silent. In the doorway, Lily felt her heartbeat pounding inside the oversized headset. She knew she should leave. She knew adults didn't like children hovering during serious work. But something inside her refused to move. Because when the plane dipped again, she saw something on the instrument panel that made her stomach twist. A trim indicator had shifted far beyond its normal range. She didn't know every system inside the aircraft, but she knew enough to recognize when something was wrong. "Sir," she said again. Hale exhaled sharply. "You need to return to your seat." "But the trim? I said go back." His voice cracked louder than he intended. For a moment, Lily stepped back, startled by the sudden anger. But then the aircraft jolted again, and something changed in the captain's expression. For the first time since she had entered the cockpit, Lily saw uncertainty in his eyes. Not panic, not fear, but doubt, the kind of doubt that appears when experience alone may not be enough. The plane dipped once more, this time the cabin filled with louder gasps. And in that moment, the flight reached a point where it could no longer simply continue as normal. Something had to change. Because the aircraft was slowly losing stability, and the ground was waiting far below. Captain Hale had spent 30 years believing that control came from discipline, from experience, from doing the same procedures until they became instinct. But experience has limits, and in that cockpit, staring at instruments that refused to behave normally, Hale realized something he had never faced before. The situation was slipping beyond the boundaries of routine training. He tried the radio again. "Tower, this is Flight 728. We are declaring an emergency. Respond." The silence on the other end now felt heavier than before. Air traffic control wasn't supposed to disappear. Not like this, not during an active flight corridor. Another tremor shook the aircraft lightly. Passengers behind the cockpit door were no longer pretending everything was normal. Conversations had stopped entirely. Parents held onto armrests. Some people whispered quiet prayers. Fear spread silently in confined spaces. And an airplane at 30,000 feet is one of the most confined places on Earth. Inside the cockpit, Lily stood very still, her eyes returning to the trim indicator again. It had shifted even farther. "Sir," she said quietly. Hale didn't snap this time. "What? That thing, it keeps moving." He followed her gaze. The trim control indicator had indeed moved again. His mind processed the information instantly. If the trim system was malfunctioning, the aircraft would constantly push its nose up or down regardless of pilot input. That would explain the sluggish response in the controls. But the system should have locked itself automatically during a fault, unless something deeper had disrupted the electronic feedback loop. Hale adjusted the control wheel again, compensating for the imbalance. The plane stabilized slightly, but he knew it wouldn't hold forever. For the first time since Lily entered the cockpit, he truly looked at her. A small girl, blonde hair slightly tangled under the headset, blue eyes wide but focused. She wasn't panicking, she was observing. That surprised him. Most adults in the same situation would already be overwhelmed. "You said your uncle flew planes?" Hale asked. "Yes, small ones. What did he teach you?" Lily hesitated before answering. "That airplanes don't like sudden movement," she said. "They like gentle corrections." Hale almost smiled despite the situation. That was actually good advice. The aircraft dipped again. He corrected the pitch slowly this time instead of fighting the controls. The plane responded better. Not perfectly, but better. Behind them, the cabin remained tense but stable. The engines continued their steady roar, pushing the aircraft through thin blue sky. And in that moment, something shifted inside the cockpit that had nothing to do with machinery. Captain Hale realized that leadership didn't always mean having every answer alone. Sometimes it meant listening, even to voices you never expected to matter. "Stay there," he said quietly. Lily nodded. Another minute passed. Then another. The aircraft stopped losing altitude, not climbing yet, but stable. Hale adjusted the trim countermeasure slowly, carefully working against the malfunctioning system. For the first time since the warnings began, the instruments steadied slightly, a small victory. but an important one. The cabin lights glowed softly. The sky outside the windshield remained bright and endless. 222 people still sat behind that cockpit door. They didn't know the details, but they were alive. And in that cockpit, something deeper than technical skill had begun to guide the situation. Cooperation, trust, and the quiet courage of someone the world might normally overlook. Because sometimes the strongest kind of help doesn't come from authority or experience. Sometimes it comes from curiosity, calm thinking, and the willingness to speak up when something feels wrong. And if there's one message this moment carries for anyone watching this story unfold, it's this. Never underestimate the power of paying attention, staying calm, and helping when you can. Even the smallest voice can steady a situation when everyone else feels lost.